How's it going today, people? So, I'm going to be putting together a series of videos showing you how I'm going to be installing an ECU on my car. So, I've got a 2002 Toyota Hilux with a 3RZFE engine, and I'm going to be installing a Link G4 Plus Monsoon ECU. So, this is not a plug and play ECU. It comes with a 2.5 meter harness, so I'm going to be pulling out the old harness from my engine and splicing in the new harness. It's not going to be a piggyback system. I'm going to be getting rid of the old ECU completely and just running this one by itself. So there's a lot of stuff I'm going to have to do. I'm actually refilming this intro because a whole bunch of my videos got corrupted for some reason, which is a massive pain, excuse the language. So we'll talk about the ECU a bit. We'll touch on it a lot more later on, but to give you the basic gist of it, the G4 Plus Monsoon that Link offers is one of their bottom of the range ECUs. It's just above the bottom one, being the Link G4 Plus Atom. The reason I chose the Monsoon is because it has an inbuilt map sensor, which will make it easier for my build. As well as that, I've bought a 2.5 meter loom that Link offers, and it's really good because it's got the few of the sensor ones teed in. It's got the TPS and the crank angle sensor and cam angle sensors fully shielded and in their own wires, which is pretty good. So the G4 Plus, I believe that the bottom of the range ones, they've got 4 injector drivers, 4 ignition drivers. So you can run a 4-cylinder with sequential injection and direct spark, so you can do all the fancy stuff like anti-lag and two-step and all that jazz. You can run 8 cylinders, LSs and stuff, off a G4 Plus ECU. You'll have to run batch fire fuel and wasted spark ignition if you're going to do that. But you can do it, and a lot of engines, the 3RZ from the factory has wasted spark. Apart from the ECU, I'm going to be changing up a couple of things in the engine bay. I'm going to be getting rid of the original ignition coils because the 3RZ is a wasted spark system. I'm going to be upgrading to LS1 ignition coils, which will be good, have a lot of spark and a lot of power. And as well as that, I'm going to be getting rid of the MAF sensor. So originally from the factory, Toyota have a MAF sensor set up in the 3RZ. While a MAF sensor is alright, you know, a manifold absolute pressure sensor will allow you to tune for air density and that when you're tuning, which is pretty good. And yeah, it's just a lot easier. You don't have to worry about like leaks and stuff in the system if you do get any, because it runs off one reference point in the manifold. As a disclaimer, I'm sort of just winging it. I've never ever done this before. I'm just going off my own initiative, reading a bunch online. So yeah, finally starting. So for my car with the 3RZ engine in it, the sensors that you're going to have to worry about are the 2 ignition coils that sit here. I've pulled mine off because I'm upgrading to LS coils. As well as that, you're going to have to worry about the all pressure sensor down here. I've got rid of mine and cut the wire on that one. If you want to keep that one, you can, because it's just going to run one wire to the dashboard. Moving over to this side, here you're going to have the engine coolant temperature sensor all the way at the back here. You're going to have all of the injectors along the fuel rail. Mine's out because I'm upgrading them. You have the TPS here, the idle air control valve under here. It's got the stepper motor here. As well as that, the crank angle sensor is down in here. I'll see if I can get a better view of it. So it runs just down to there. That's the crank angle sensor. The cam angle sensor is just there on the head, right next to the fuel rail, or where the fuel rail should go. The knock sensor is down under here, just like the crank angle sensor, but I wasn't able to get to mine, and I don't even need it because it's a Link ECU. It's a G4 Plus, so it doesn't have a knock module in it. As well as that, the only other sensors I believe that you have to worry about are some weird aircon sensors that sit down there and down there. That's the basic gist of it. Pretty much with your loom, yeah, you just unplug all your sensors, undo any wires, and it runs straight through the firewall in the Hilux and comes straight out in the passenger side. So in the Hilux, the stock ECU sits down inside here and sits just above there. You can see where the original wires are that would plug into it. So I've got rid of mine and I've stuck my Link ECU. So I've stuck my Link just on the bottom of my glove box. So it's going to face backwards down inside here. So I'll be able to plug straight into it and run the sensor run the boost reference for the map sensor. As well as that, I'm going to drill a little hole out here where there's a mark and run the cable straight to it from there. so hopefully it stays plugged in. But yeah, that'll be wicked. So I'll be able to just literally coil a cable up in the glove box up here. Okay, so this mess right here is the old harness, which I pulled out of the car. Toyota's done sort of weird stuff here. I'll see if I can show it. So this is the green and black wires are plus 5 volts for sensors. And the way they've banked them together is just wrapped them all here and then like crimped and soldered them under this little cap. They've done the same for the 12 volt power for the coils and injectors. So yeah, that's just something notable. I guess you can sort of do this kind of sketchy stuff with your wires and that. With your 12 volt it should be fine. The only real time that you don't really want to solder and make weird crummy connections is signal wires and trigger wires. I've sorted out all the wires that are going to be in the engine bay, and I'll talk you through them real quick. So I've got auxiliary outputs 1 through 3. So auxiliary output 1 and 2 are going to be controllers for my idle speed control valve, and then auxiliary output 3 is going to be for my boost solenoid when I eventually get one. From what I know, boost solenoids are just 2 wires, one's a 12 volt and the other's a pulse width modulated earth, sorry. So auxiliary output's sorted. The next one we'll talk about is both the intake and engine temperatures. These are already put together by Link, which is awesome. So those two are sorted. We'll put the sorted ones over that side, sorry. Auxiliary, you get over there. TPS, so that's already put together by Link in their loom, which is awesome. That's analog volt 3, and then the ground and the 5 volt. Both the crank and cam angle sensor trigger wires, so the black one's going to be the crank, I'm pretty sure. Let me just check. So trigger one's going to be the crank, which is the black one here. It's fully shielded wire. And then trigger 2 is going to be the cam sensor, so they're sorted. I've got a spare analog volt, which I'm going to keep in the engine bay. I'm going to just sort of hide it and run it around things to make up the length of it. I've got an engine ground and a chassis ground, which are going to be in the engine bay. And then finally, I've got the ignition and injection drives, and then the other one I have is an external map sensor to put into this. I think I've said before, but this loom that I bought, the 2.5 meter loom that Link offers, it's for the G4 Plus series, and I think it's for the Atom, which is an ECU that doesn't have an inbuilt map sensor. So I'm just going to keep this in the engine bay anyway. I might actually use the ground for something else, potentially, I will see. But yeah, anyway. So that's all sorted for this, and as far as the inside of the cab goes, I have all my digital inputs are going to be in here. The spare analog volts, sorry, the spare auxiliary outputs, which I don't use. One of them is going to be for the fuel pump, I believe, actually. Got the 12 volt ignition. What else have I got? I'll label these. These are the CAN bus controllers. And then there's one more here, which is the, the analog volt for the 5 volt from the wideband controller. These green wires here, you can see that they're joined here. So these all run to the single signal ground pinout on the ECU. So I'm going to cut one of these wires, strip it back, put a crimp connector on it so that I can run another earth off it, effectively teeing into it for my wideband sensor. So it's pretty simple how to do this. I'll show you. So I'm just going to face it, once I've cut it, I'm going to face the wire back this way so that it'll come out the back of the loom where the shielding is and be able to go to the wideband controller in my cabin. So I'm going to bring through my wire strippers here and use the cutting function here. Just give it the big old snippy snoo. So once that's done, you can come through and strip it just there. Do the same on the other wire here. There we go. And something that you can do if you want is just twist them around like that. I've munched a bit of that cable, so I'm going to add a bit extra heat shrink on that one. So I'll put this extra long piece on first. Then your bit of solder seal. And now I'm going to cut my cable for the ground for the wideband. Anyway, so we're going to put a nick in this one there. Grab your open barrel crimp ones and just sit the tab in there and not squeeze it at all. So I'll slide the back wire in to where the pin will grab the shielding itself. Slide the front wire in as well. So give it a good squeeze and you can see it's made a nice little crimp there. Now you can also crimp the back one as well. Just like this with the slightly bigger one. And a good practice to do is put it in the smaller one. Give it another squeeze just on top of it, just to make sure it's fully seated. So now I'm going to come in with my wire that I'm teeing into it, which should hopefully be small enough. And I'm going to put the crimp in the barrel right now. I hope that's crimped. Yeah, sweet. So you can see that's crimped in there. And now I'll also crimp these back ends on here. So line it up in the things like that. There you go. See, it pulls it over. Now you've got a strong ass connection, and also you put your solder seal over the top here. Like this, and now when that melts, that's going to make a nice strong connection. And then straight after that's done, I'll slide my heat shrink over it and heat shrink that as well. So let's see if I can do that. So this is the connector for my main body wires from the original ECU harness. So I'm going to try and depin them as this is the one that I was working on before that has the reverse switch and the temperature wire in it. So I'm just going to end up pulling out all of the wires through the harness that I need. So this one goes to the temperature gauge plug. So I'll identify the ones I need. I'll keep the 12 volt positives that are teed all together, as I might use some of them for my ECU for the for certain sensors. And yeah, so I'll identify the wires that I do and don't need, and then just snip the ones I don't need, and I'll be able to keep the plug, which will be mad. Okay, so it's a bit poor lighting. I apologise. I've got my harness out near the car for the first time. So I'm going to push it through the firewall and mark up all of the lengths I need on the runners, on the wires, sorry, for the sensors. So this will be the first dry fit in the car. And yeah, I'll show you how I'm going to do it. To push it through the firewall, I'm going to make up a little cone out of paper to help me. Okay, so I've got my loom to about the length that I want it inside the glove box. Ignore all those wires here, we'll deal with that after. So what I'm going to do now is come out to where the loom's poked through the firewall. I'm going to start marking on the loom certain spots where it's going to branch. So first of all, I'll put a I've got different coloured electrical tape, so I'll put a red mark here to show that that's right where it comes out the firewall, and I'll write something on it. And then after that, I'll put each individual wire to where it's going to go. So I'll start with the trigger wires, one to cam, one to crank. So I've got 2 left over. Oh no, sorry, I've got 1 left over. I've got my intake temp sensor, which is going to sit in the charge pipes, which will run over the valve cover for now. Then I've got external map as well. The reason that's spare is because the Link Monsoon has an inbuilt map sensor, which is wicked. So coming under my intake manifold is going to be my 4 injector drivers, as well as my TPS sensor and my ISC, and then the obviously the triggers, because you got the crank angle sensor down under here, then the cam angle sensor just there in the head. So what I'm going to do is, because I think I explained earlier, but down the track I'll probably switch to a forward-facing plenum. So I'm going to have the idle speed control and TPS wires come out to here, then loop back and go to their spots, just so there's more length, so they can come all the way out to here if I put a forward-facing plenum on it. Apart from that, I've got my chassis ground ran. I'm going to ground it here where the rest of the stuff is earthed. So the engine ground is going to be grounded to the stock point that joins the engine to the chassis. So you have 4 ignition drivers around here, got a 12 volt line there, as well as 1 auxiliary output. So that's going to be to a boost control solenoid if I choose to get one of them down the track. And then as well as the engine coolant temperature sensor, which is on the back of the block. So I'll mark up the branches, take it inside and make up the loom to that point, and then yeah, I'll maybe bring it back out, stick it back in the car and cut everything to length and go off that. Got the ECU coming out of the firewall, and I've got branch here which goes behind. I've got the branch for the engine coolant sensor, the branch for the earth for the engine block, then a branch for all of the ignition coil wires. So there's an ECU ground, engine temperature gauge, and then the 12 volt power for the coils as well. And then these ones are extra ones, which I'm going to sort of tuck up behind and run them down so it looks like it's factory. And then over under here I've identified where the trigger ones are going to go. I'll have to change that one around a bit because I made a little mistake, but I'll do that inside when I'm putting the shrouding around everything. Okay guys, so it's still a bit messy, but I've essentially got it how it's going to look. So I've got all of the extra wires I don't need coiled up. As long as they don't have charge running through them, you can coil them up like that and that's fine. If they do have charge, you may get electrical interference because they create like an induction coil. But anyway, I've got the reverse sensor switch and the all temperature gauge input plugged in through this one here. So this is where the link's going to plug in. It's going to sit about up here. Might have to shorten it a bit. So the link ECU itself, just on top of my glove box there, needs a 7.5 amp or a 5 amp fuse for it, for the plus 14 volt in. So if we look on the wiring diagram here, this is the battery of the Hilux, comes all the way across, and you got a 7.5 amp fuse for the OBD scanner. So if you follow that line down, it goes to the scanning tool. So I've never ever used the scanning tool in this car, and I doubt I will if I'm all sussed with a link ECU. So I'm gonna pinch this 7.5 amp wire and use it as power for my ECU. So the OBD scanner on the Hilux, or on the RZN149 at least, there's one in the engine bay which is powered by the ECU, but the other one is just here, right under the dash. So I'm going to pull the power wire off that one and run it across to that side where the ECU is. What I've just gone ahead and done is hooked up the 2 relays here. So I don't know if you can see it, but I've teed off this output here. So this is the 12 volt power that would originally go to a few of the sensors. So that's gone into one side of the switch part of the relay there, and then goes to the other one, and then earths out to a ring connector on the second one up there. Don't know if you can see that. Okay, so now what I've got to do is identify which pin was the one that the ECU earthed for the fuel pump to come on. And so how I'm going to do that is read off the diagram to find the pin colour. And then what I've also done is I've disconnected the line that would go to the feed of the fuel rail. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just stick it into the mower fuel canister there. And then I'm going to chuck the battery on. Hopefully it doesn't spark or anything, because that would end my day probably. And I'll earth out the wire that I've been told is the one for the ECU, for the fuel pump, sorry. And if that switches the fuel pump on while the key's on the on position, then I'll know that's the wire to hook up to my auxiliary output. Got my fuel canister here, so we'll put that there where it's nice and sturdy, and then wrap this line around. So I'm going to switch my key to the on position and then earth out the wire that I believe it is, and hopefully I'll get fuel flow. You should be able to hear the fuel pump. Yep, that's it. There's this wire here, which is a green and yellow wire, the one that I've got the end cut off on. So I just touch that to up there, and it, yeah, flick the fuel pump on, so I know that's the one to hook up to my auxiliary output. Okay, so I've got 4 wires into a Deutsch plug. So the bottom 2 are the earth and the plus 5 volt from my wideband sensor, an AEM X series with its own 0 to 5 volt output. And then the red one up the top right is the power to the ECU with a 7.5 amp fuse. And then the one to the left of that is the earth for the fuel pump for the auxiliary output low side. So the only other thing I have to do inside now is splice in the wire for the tacho, as well as probably 1 wire for a digital input, which will be a switch next to my knee for something if I want to do that. So I've got my harness laid out on the ground. What I'm going to be using to wrap mine is this self-braided closing wrap. So this stuff reckons it's rated for -50 to plus 150 degrees Celsius. So that's pretty much perfect for what I need. So the way I'm going to do this is just, wrap up each bit of the harness, and where wires tee out of it, I'm probably just going to put a little wrap of electrical tape around this braided harness, just a little gap, and poke the wire through it. So I've got a few different sizes here. I got, what size is this? Got 19, 13, and then 9mm, I believe. Yep. And just before I start on this, the one thing I have to do is I'm going to run a separate 12 volt wire for the idle speed control motor, and potentially a boost controller if I put one of them in down the track. Again, this is kind of awkward to do it now because I don't exactly know where I'm going to mount my boost controller. It is going to be close to my wastegate, so I do have some kind of idea. So I'm just going to run it around the back of the engine, just like all of the other wires for the coils and that. And yeah, so I'm going to get that teed in now. The 12 volt I'm going to get from one of the original outputs for the sensors in the engine bay. So I'll cut all my bits of tape and tuck in another 12 volt wire, which will be a smaller gauge, so I'll know which one it is. And yeah, I'll do that real quick, and then I'll show you how I'm going to wrap up the harness. Okay, so I'm going to just make sure that all my wires are taut first, so they're all nice and tight. So once they're all tight like that, I'll be able to start wrapping this stuff around it. So I'm going to wrap it, and then where I come to a junction, I'm then going to decide what to do from there. In fact, I'm going to, just periodically, I'm going to put little wraps of electrical tape. Probably not the best idea to wrap your whole one in electrical tape, but I mean, I'm a bit pressed for time and I can't be bothered finding legit stuff, so I'll just give it a little wrap here and there to keep it nice and bunched together. You can probably terminate your wrapping like close enough to the inside of the cabin where there's not going to be that much interference. Just ideally your wrapping so that you don't burn any holes in your loom when your engine gets touched. So you can see I'm just sort of opening it up like that and tucking it in. For the part where the for the part of the loom that sticks straight through the firewall, the factory harness had this protection stuff, and it had this little grommet here I've sort of kept mine alright. I did have to cut mine to get it through, but I'll sort of be able to just wrap that in sticky tape and reuse that, which will be nice and make it look stock. I've put a little cut in it here. It looks a bit rough, but what that does is it allows them to come down here through the loom wrap itself. And then if you wrap it together like this, you can make it look pretty alright. I might put a little nick of electrical tape there to help it together. But yeah, so that's what that's going to look like. And then I'll just keep wrapping down until I decide to terminate it where the junction is. So I'll probably cut it about here. You want a little bit of overlap so it looks okay. This is good stuff actually. Pretty happy I've got it. Alright, so that terminates where the junction is. Then I'll be able to move on to the smaller wrap for these individual ones. Okay, so I'm going to wait before I put this one on. I'm going to have it one more dry fit in the car so that I know where everything is placed, and then I'll put marks on the harness where that's going to go. Okay, so I've got where the branch is now, just here, and there's going to be a branch here for the 12 volt for the injectors, as well as all of the injector drivers, which I have here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then yeah, the 12 volt here. So there's actual 3 branches from this spot. One branch which goes around the back of the engine, which has the engine coolant sensor, my ignition drives and all of that. And then the second branch is the intake air temperature sensor, which I'm going to have to put in my charge pipe. And then yeah, the third is the triggers, the injectors, and the idle air control and throttle position sensor. So with these ones, I'll bust out the smaller wrap. I don't know if there's a way to cut this stuff cleanly, because it sort of wants to do its own thing. But yeah, I'll probably just try and wrap it so that it's as hidden as possible. Okay guys, so I've got shrouding put around a good portion of my loom, and now I'm going to do another dry fit in the car so I can mark up the lengths for each wire that I need and then trim them to length, and then I'll be able to pull it out again, bring it into the room and start pinning on the connectors, as well as getting the shrouding to what I want it to be. Okay, so I've got all of the wires mocked up to where I want them. I've put little marks on them where I'm going to snip them and then take them inside and start pinning them together. Yeah, so basically anyway, I've cut all of my injector wires to length, so now that I've done that, I have added a little bit extra along the end of it. So I've just done that with every one of my wires just to be sure. So the wires that I will do inside are going to be the crank and cam angle sensor pins. So I'll do them inside now because they're pretty much the exact right length. But yeah, so because I've cut the injector wires to the right length, I'll be able to take it inside and make up a positive bank from the red wire there, which is a 15 amp fused connection I've put inside the cabin there. As well as that, I've put the 12 volt for the IAC out here. It's going to look a little bit messy, but I'll see if I can tuck it up under the intake manifold. Yeah, I've put little marks on it where I'm going to terminate each wire. With some of them, the actual heat shrink is a bit too long, so I'll be able to terminate that a bit earlier. All I've got to do now pretty much is sort out how the coils are going to sit on the valve cover here. I'm going to have to make a heat shield because I don't want them getting heated the shit up by the exhaust and getting too hot and melting, which would not be fun. And apart from that, I just need to get oil fittings for the turbo so that the engine can run. So the 5 connectors which I bought, which I needed for the 3RZ engine, you're going to need different ones depending on what engine you're doing. So I needed the crank angle, the cam angle, the idle air control, the throttle position sensor, and the temperature gauge for the engine ECU. The actual temperature gauge on the dash is its own separate sensor in the engine bay, which I've also run in my wires. So I got all them. They were about 15 or 20 bucks each. And as well as that, I got the crimper tool from the place. This was insanely expensive. Have a guess, have a wild guess. $80, Australian dollars, $80. $80, I can't get over that. But yeah, apart from spending my entire life savings on a single tool, I've got everything I need to get this ECU running, hopefully. So what I'm going to do now is make sure I've got everything together and everything written down correctly. And now I'm going to crimp my brand new connectors onto my loom. Finally. So this is the box that I originally used, because when I pulled the old wiring harness out of the car, I painstakingly depinned and pulled apart each connector and put them in this box and labeled it here so that I'd be able to easily crimp new pins and snap them together onto the new harness. I hoped at least I could do that. And I identified the pins, or tried to, and then bought some new ones off the internet. Don't know how well that'll focus. There you go. I'm going to work on pinning these on now because I should have everything I need. 2 clicks. These two are in. Alright, so once you've got all these crimped on, your 5-volt signal wire goes in the middle of the clip, sorry. So the 5-volt on the link loom is the red and blue wire just here. And then your yellow is going to go on this side, because your yellow is your AN volt. And then finally your ground, or your earth, is going to go on this side here. ECU ground. One, two, three. So the idle speed control valve's a bit weird. It gets a 12-volt positive to it, which I'm running separately out of the wiring harness like this. The reasoning for that is, I think I've stated it before, but down the track I'll probably switch to a front-facing intake manifold plenum, and that means that the throttle body is going to be moved from over the valve cover to out the front of the engine, which means which is why I've made my wiring for the throttle position sensor and the idle air control valve much longer than I needed it. But yeah, so it's going to be sort of messy, but I'm going to see if I can hide this 12-volt positive wire somewhere in line. But yeah, that's that. Okay, so I've got the loom laid out, sort of how I want it. I had to take it out again to put this rubber grommet in, and oh, it's so stressful putting that in. Like a few times I was so close to just yanking it as hard as I could, but like no, I've put in too much work to break this already. So yeah. Alright, now what I've got to do is get it to where I want it. It's going to still look a little bit messy, especially the front part here where the throttle position and idle air control valve wires go because they're extra long. But yeah, I'll sort of just cable tie them and tuck them out of the way so that they're not too yuck. And then I'll be able to crimp on my injector connectors and then sort out the coil connectors as well. And then just hide all the wires over there, the extra ones, the auxiliary ones. And yeah, that should be it.
They are now richer than the people that just sat there and did a shitty job just to get by to the next week. Think about it. It makes total sense. If you're sitting there doing, say, 40 hours a week just so you have a paycheck so you can go like, yeah, I've got enough money to look at the TV. What a life. That scares the shit out of me.
Yeah, look, I'm no hero. Yeah, I ain't no Robert De Niro. Yeah, I got no De Niro's. Bank account all out zero. But yes, yeah, my mama's all stressed and I'm all up in a mess. Yeah, my hair was up but now it's down, it's all because of this. Yeah, the music may be passion but it's passive aggressive like The Rock. Yeah, stones thrown can never be stopped. I mean, hopefully. But look, there's no hope for me, cause I got all my tissues, yeah, tied up in a knot, and I'm not about to cut loose, so stop.
So the firing order for the 3RZ is 1, 3, 4, 2. So I don't know if there's any particular problem with 3 and 4 being right next to each other, but I mean there's no real way I can get around that. It's not going to make a difference. I think they're pretty well insulated and they've got an ECU and an engine ground. So yeah, I'll mark up the lengths for the plug wires and then I'll crimp on the 90-degree tabs and yeah, they should be nice. And then I can get the plugs crimped on and then, fingers crossed, I'll fill it with oil and it should be ready to try and start. Okay, so I've made a bank of positive 12 volt wires, a bank of ECU grounds, a bank of engine grounds, and then the 4 coil wires, the 4 ignition drivers. So the way that these ignition coils work, the LS ones, looking at it from this direction, you've got an engine ground, the ECU ground, the signal, and then a 12 volt positive. So I'm going to wire in each one and see if I'm able to get it to crank over and fire. Alright, so keen, Jesus. So right now I can crimp on my intake air temperature sensor, which I've just whacked in my charge pipe just there. I need to find a bung for the valve cover. There's a hole down there that has a, don't know if you can see it. I know there's a hole down just behind here that acts as a positive crank ventilator, I think. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bung that up and then run the original one that's just there. So this is where the 100 amp fuse sits, just here. I actually broke mine because I thought it was just like a regular fuse like this you could just yank out, but it's not. It's actually bolted in there and somewhere down under here. So I've went ahead and bought a new fuse. This is what it looks like. It has the spades on it, which the bolts go through and bolt down. So yeah, all you have to do is just undo each bolt, yank out the old spades if you've broken it like mine, just slot the new one in and bolt it in and you should be good. Okay guys, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pulse each injector pulse each spark plug separately and make sure that they all function properly. So link off is a feature where you can test each spark plug or each coil. Okay, they all were. So now I'm going to switch off my injectors. I'll come over here, and this is the oil feed off my turbo, and I'll run it into a little reservoir, and then I'll crank the engine until I get oil out of it, so I know that I have oil pressure. Okay, so there's just something I want to touch on before I have a go at cranking. Fire extinguisher. You don't want your pride and joy burning to the ground right in front of you. So I sat on cranking it for a while and I got some oil pressure, which is good. So I'll whack the oil line back on, tighten the shit out of all of my fuel lines, and hopefully I should be able to start it. Okay, so it's early Saturday morning again. I had to wait the entire week before I could have a go at getting it started. I had a few attempts, but I think the settings in the ECU were wrong, so I'm going to play around with it a bit now. I'm going to remove a little bit from the fuel map and see if that'll get it to go. What I'm doing just now is decanting my old coolant through a filter so that I can whack it back in. I've filled up the radiator with brand new coolant, but the engine needs to run to cycle it through for the thermostat to open. And yeah, so I've primed it a bunch of times. None of the fuel fittings leak or anything, so yeah. I'm just going to go ahead and give it a crank, see if it fires, and if it does, I'll see if I can get it to idle. Immediately fill up my coolant, and then I'll play around with the fuel maps and get it to idle in a air-fuel ratio that suits what I want it to. I'm going to aim for about 0.95 to 1.0 lambda. I'm going to tune off lambda instead of air-fuel ratio. It's easy to work with because you can work off like percentage bases as you adjust the fuel map, which is pretty cool. But yeah, so I'll just get all my coolant decanted, get everything ready, and I'll film a bit before I start it up. Okay, so I've removed a little bit from my fuel map because I think it was running too rich and it just was blowing out my spark. I didn't actually pull the spark plugs and test, but that's just my guesstimation. So yeah, I've removed a bit from the fuel map. I think the ignition map's good. I've done my trigger calibrations already, so yeah, I think that I should be pretty good. So let's go give it a testy too.